Well, I want to welcome you to the dead of winter, whatever campus you're at, whatever device you're watching us on. My name is Ben, and we're in the middle of a series where we're really trying to look at what are some of those simple life principles that we can hold on to help us navigate the winters of our life. Those seasons where we feel a little meh, where we feel exhausted and stressed out, or just depressed today. Doesn't mean it has to stay that way. In fact, the Bible teaches that we can experience newness, new life, fresh air, those things that our soul craves, especially when we're in the midst of one of those winters. This weekend, I've invited a friend, Barb Roose, friend of the Creek, author, speaker all over the country, to come and talk about some of her new content that she's going to be releasing in a brand new book that you get to hear a little bit of first. She's going to help address some of the worry and anxiety and fear that we face in some of our winters. And so, at all of our campuses, will you please put your hands together for Barb Roose?
Hey everyone! It is great being back with you. Thank you, Ben, for inviting me to be a part of the series, How to Survive the Dead of Winter. This weekend's message had its beginnings in a series in 2011. The series back then was titled Vintage Faith, and our founding pastor, Lee Powell, asked each of us to choose someone in the Bible that we admired, someone who had courageous faith. And so I chose a man from the Old Testament named Joshua. And then Lee also asked us to do something courageous as part of that message. So the programming team and I met, and we kicked around some ideas, and at first they said, Barb, you know what would be really courageous? If you would go to the Toledo Zoo and pet a tarantula. Now, if you follow me on social media, you know that I am deathly afraid of spiders, so the answer to that was no. Then they sat there, room got quiet, and somebody said, hey, would you go skydiving? And I thought about it. Now, I knew for sure I would die if I touched a tarantula, but I was like, you know what? I got a 50-50 chance jumping out of a plane. So the next day, I hopped in the car with a couple of Cedar Creek staffers. We drove across the state of Ohio, and I jumped out of an airplane. Here's a photo of it. And that is me. I fell out of a plane at 10,000 feet. Free fall, 10 seconds at 120 miles an hour, and it was amazing. If you want to watch the entire skydive video, it's actually posted on the Cedar Creek Facebook page or on my Facebook page if we're friends. But that weekend message on Joshua actually began what now is what's happening in my season of life. And so we're going to dive into the series of how do we survive the dead of winter. We've been talking about the survival guide, and as we go into the series, I'll explain what that Joshua message has to do with what we're talking about today. But every week we've had the survival guide because when we're in the midst of an emotional, relational, whatever financial winter, we have that meh feeling of, oh my gosh, I have to deal with this. When will this be over? And so every week we've started with the survival guide, and this week's is just because I feel worried today or anxious or stressed out, it doesn't mean it has to stay that way. And that's on your program, and I want you to hold on to that bit of hope that if you are feeling anxious and stressed out and worried today, it doesn't have to stay that way. Now, do you or someone you know feel anxious or stressed or worried? For me, this is exciting because I have a new Bible study coming out called Joshua, Winning the Worry Battle. It's on the book of Joshua. You'll see the cover in a moment. I also have a separate book coming out called Winning the Worry Battle. And both projects, they're both separate. They take principles from the Old Testament book of Joshua, and I create practical solutions that work so that you can get rid of those stressed out days and those sleepless nights. Now, when you read the book, you practice the solutions, then you're able to get energy around you because worry wears us out. And I love being able to attack the life that God has given me with passion and hope instead of feeling like, oh, I don't know if I can deal with this. So what's fun is that my publishing company has made the first week of the book, or the Bible study, as well as the first chapter of the book available for you to download for free. So on the bottom of your message notes, there are some instructions there for you to do that. And then today, we're going to talk about a couple of those principles from the book of Joshua, and I am going to give you some practical solutions that will work so that you can stop living worn out by worry. You can actually win over it. Because worry, when we look at the dictionary definition, worry means that we torment ourselves with negative or disturbing thoughts. That's what the dictionary says. For me, worry is about those negative mental movies that we have in our mind. The negative mental movie when your husband, wife, your friend, or your kid, they're an hour late, they don't text, and what does your mind start churning? They're lying dead in a ditch somewhere. Like, you can see the whole thing playing out in front of you. You can hear the phone call from the police officer. You can see yourself running to the accident scene. Or maybe you're sitting at your desk. It's lunchtime. Your boss comes by and says, "Hey, why don't you swing by my office before you leave today?" And all of a sudden, you spend the whole afternoon seeing yourself get fired. And you see yourself walking to the car with your little cardboard box of your stuff. And then you see your house for sale, and you see yourself living on the street. It's that whole mental thing that plays out in your mind. If you're a parent and you've got a little kid, we fear our kids getting kidnapped. Like, I had those mental movies when my kids were growing up. I tortured myself with all of these scenarios of seeing my child in the back of a car waving, and I'm running down the road, and I'm trying to catch him, and the car gets farther away. If you're a parent, all of the school shootings, some of the schools this week facing threats, how many of you have struggled with the mental movies, knowing that an actual tragedy has happened, but you yourself have been churning on those mental movies over and over again, where you see those horrible images play out in your life? It's one thing for us to churn on those mental movies, but what happens to us physically? That kind of worry wears us out, doesn't it? When we worry like that, we end up with that horrible, nauseous stomach. And sometimes you feel jittery and nervous and you can't keep your thoughts straight. Some of us, we cry all the time, or we got that short fuse. And then there's the pacing and those sleepless nights. Do you know that the number one time slot for worry is 9 p.m. to 3 a.m.? Right now, I am looking for some life group leaders who will do my Joshua Bible study at midnight, because some of you are going to be up. The studies tell us that the average person worries 55 minutes per day. 55, almost an hour a day you spend in your mind churning on these horrible negative movies about your life. And if you have an anxiety disorder, the data says you can worry up to 5 hours of your life every day. The part that's tough for us is that when we are worrying or stressed out all the time, we begin to think that's who we are. But every week of the series, Ben has said something profound. He said, we've got to acknowledge the feeling, but we don't want to turn this into our state of being. Because when you say, "Oh, I'm just a worrier," "Oh, I just get stressed out really easily," then you begin to do the things that stressed out and worried people do. I'm going to share with you 4 of the worrying behavioral types that I talk about in the book, and you can identify whether or not 1 or 2 or even 3 of these behavioral types that match up with you. The first one is the silent sufferer. This is the person who they hear all of the things that are happening around it, and they just stuff all of the worries inside. We often begin our worrying scenarios with, "What if this happens? What if that happens?" So the silent sufferer, they hear a friend who's going to go on a trip across the country, and the silent sufferer goes, "Well, what if they run out of gas? What if they get stuck? What if their GPS goes out? What if they don't have a way to get a hold of anybody? What if their hotel is bad?" And they have all of these worries, and they just stuff them down inside, and they're miserable. Then you've got the busybody. This is the kind of worrier who can't leave any detail undone. And so they are running around. They are just overly into anything and everything because loose details make them anxious. They're afraid that someone is going to miss out on something, that someone's going to get hurt, that someone's going to get left out, that something's going to be missing. And so they're like a Mr. Fix-It, and they just run around all of the time, using up all of their energy. Because if they can fix everything, then they can feel calmer. And then we have the control freaks. The control freaks like to say that they are due diligent people, that they're type A. But really, the control freak, they say, it's my way or the highway. If people would just do what I need them to do when I need them to do it, everyone's going to be happy. The control freak believes that if they can reposition everyone into the place where they think is best, then everyone will be happier and calmer, especially them. And then finally, we have the mother hen. And the mother hen is cluck, 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 nag, 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 nag. The mother hen wants to show love and concern by calling and texting all of the time. Do you have what you need? What are you doing today? When are you going to be home? Do you have enough? Are you sure you're out of? Do you want me to pick up? What are you doing? What time? Can you text me when you get there? The mother hen is so anxious and worried about all of the what-if scenarios that he or she ends up smothering the people in his or her life with their worries. When you think about the silent sufferer, the busybody, the control freak, or the mother hen, what kind of behaviors do you find yourself in? Now, many of you, as I've gotten feedback from people, are like, I'm like 2 or 3 of those. I'm like, I get you. Because for me, I've been rocking the control freak, the mother hen, and the busybody for a long time. I can't stuff anything. But for those of you, no matter what behavioral personality, we all know this about worry. It doesn't work. There is nothing about it that works. In fact, Jesus in Matthew 27 says this. He says that can all your worries add a single moment to your life? We think that if we do all of the right things, if we try to fix it, if we try to stuff it, if we try to control it, if we try to nag it, that we could make ourselves feel better and we could protect the people around us. And worry ends up wearing us out. And none of us ever say, I really wish I would spend more time worrying. Worrying actually makes me feel better about things. Like worry makes us feel like we're doing something, but worry never makes us feel better, does it? This is a lesson for me that became real personal while I was writing the book. I started the Bible study in June, and by April I was writing the book. And so I had spent months immersed in what the Bible had to say about fear and worry, because I was a huge worrier. And I still worry, but there are things that God has taught me. But man, fear and worry has been a huge battle in my life. On October 18th, my dad had a biopsy. He had turned 67 the week before. He had never been in the hospital in my entire life. And he had a biopsy, and we knew that there was something wrong. 3 days later, my sister called, and she said, Barb, it's me. Dad wanted me to call you to say goodbye. My dad was in the hospital dying of renal failure. I got in the car, I drove 2 hours across the state. And by the time I got into the hospital and the oncologist came in, they said, we don't have your father's biopsy results back, but we are pretty sure that he has metastatic lung cancer. It's already spread. Because his kidneys have shut down, he can't have treatment. And your dad only has days to live. It was October, 22nd at this point. And I realized that I only had a few days left with my dad. And was I going to spend the precious moments of the time we had left together freaking out in fear? Was I going to let worry wear me out so that I would be too strung out to enjoy those precious moments with my dad? Or was I going to stand on God's promises and some of the tools that I'm going to share with you today so that not one single precious moment of my dad could be wasted? And in fact, my dad passed away just 8 days later. How many of us are losing the precious moments of our lives to worry and anxiety? That we have the people around us that we love and care about, but we are stuck in these mental movies in our mind about things that we don't have control over, and it is wearing us out. It is sapping our energy for living. We aren't able to solve any problems. We're just making mess because we're reacting out of fear and worry. But God has a better way forward for you and I. Some of the problem with worry is uncertainty. Uncertainty is because we don't know what will happen in the future. God, will my spouse survive cancer? God, can you just tell me if my child will stop taking drugs? God, am I going to lose my job? Can you tell me? Jesus, please let me know if my marriage is going to survive. We think that if God tells us up front what's going to happen to us, that knowledge will make the hardship easier to deal with. Uncertainty, it is not easier to deal with knowledge. Uncertainty is easier to deal with security and knowing who God is. If we know what's going to happen to us, we're going to know everything that's going to happen to us. Actually, in the Winning the Worry Battle book, I say it just like that. While we want to know everything that's going to happen to us, we're going to find out everything that's going to happen to us. Do you want to know, do you want to see the things in your life that are happening now? Did you want to see them 10 years ago? What would that have done? You would have been anxious and worried about things in the future that you couldn't change. So instead of us being fixated on trying to solve uncertainty, let us instead put our effort in placing our trust in the secure God. And this is where we step into Joshua's story. The book of Joshua is the 6th book in the Bible. And at the stage in Joshua chapter 1, there are over 1 million Israelites who are standing on the eastern edge of the Jordan River. You're going to see the picture of the Promised Land. And you'll see where Moab is circled at. That's where 1 million Israelites are standing. Now, if you're familiar with the Old Testament, you know that at the beginning of the book of Joshua, the Israelites have finally gotten out of the wilderness. They had spent 40 days in the wilderness after escaping slavery in Egypt. Pharaoh kind of told them they could go, and then he changed their mind, and they had to escape through the Red Sea. But for those 40 years, the Israelites wandered in the desert. Now, they shouldn't have been there for 40 years, but it was fear and worry that kept them out of the Promised Land 40 years before. And because of fear and worry, they rebelled against God. And God said, you know what? I will take care of you while you are in the desert, but you do not get to experience my blessing for 40 years. And the takeaway for you and I is that God does promise that he will take care of us. But how many of us have let fear and worry rob us from God's blessing? And so now those 40 years have passed. There's over 1 million people standing here on the eastern edge of the Jordan River. And when you look at the Promised Land, I know that the names look different and the boundaries and the geography look look a little strange. But if you've ever watched a dystopian show like Game of Thrones or a superhero Marvel or DC Comics movie, you know that it takes just a little bit of time to get used to the different rhythm of the names and the places. And my encouragement with you would be to do a Bible study like on Joshua, because the topography of the Promised Land, it holds so much foreshadowing, and it is such a metaphor for what God talks about to us in the New Testament about eternal peace and rest. This area of the Promised Land, God had promised to his people 400 years before. And so the book of Joshua is about how God keeps his promises. Now, as those 1 million people are standing there, their leader's name is Joshua. And he was formerly Moses' apprentice. And when you think about the man Joshua, I want you to picture Steve Rogers, Captain America. Like, Joshua was the guy, and he always stood for what was just and right. And he was a valiant soldier. But as he is standing there looking out over the Jordan River into the Promised Land, that is a land of uncertainty for the people. Joshua had been there before. He was one of the people that scouted the land years ago. But for Joshua, the uncertainty was that he was going to be the military leader that had to defeat 31 kings who lived in that land. When we stand on the edge of uncertainty in life, we know that there are often battles that are before us. And sometimes we get a little anxious and worried because we know that we're going to have to fight through the unknown. And sometimes that leaves us feeling a little insecure. And maybe Joshua felt that way, because this is what God says to Joshua in Joshua chapter 1. God says, I promise you what I promised Moses. Wherever you set your foot, you will be on land that I have given you. From the Negev wilderness in the south to the Lebanon mountains in the north, from the Euphrates River in the east to the Mediterranean Sea in the west, including all of the land of the Hittites. No one will be able to stand against you as long as you live, for I will be with you as I was with Moses. I will not fail or abandon you. Now, those land geographies that God talked about, The Negev wilderness, that was actually below the southern boundary of the Promised Land. The Lebanon mountains was north of the boundaries of the Promised Land. The Euphrates River was way east, and the Mediterranean Sea was right on the edge. What God promised Joshua for where he would have victory was far beyond the boundaries of the Promised Land. And when we look in the scriptures, the lesson for you and I is that when God promises us and what God promises us is more abundant than what you and I will ever need in this life. And when God says in verse 5, no one will be able to stand against you, that's the security that Joshua needed. He didn't need to know how hard it was going to be to fight the kings. He didn't need to know where the kings' names are, where their names are at. He needed to know that he would be secure because God was with him. And then when God says, I will be with you, that is courage. Because Joshua knew that he wouldn't be standing alone in the battle. And then I will not fail you or abandon you. That is strength. Because what you and I are afraid of is that we won't have what it takes to make it all the way through whatever we're facing. The promises that God makes to you and I, there's 3 of them that you can write on your sheet. And these promises, these aren't about our worry battle. These are the promises that God makes to us. The first promise is personal victory. That you will have victory in everything that God has assigned for you to do. Now, the difference between winning and victory. Winning, think about if you've ever run a foot race or if you've won a game. Like when you win, you're like, yeah, I did it. That feels good. But victory is like the Olympics. When you're standing on the top podium and you've got the gold medal, it feels a little bit better than winning. Like winning feels good, but victory is when I have overcome. I have faced whatever the challenge was, and I have overcome it. And God promises you personal victory for whatever he has called you to do. And then God has also promised provisional victory, that you will never have to fear scarcity. How many of our worries are because we don't think we're going to have enough? We don't have enough money for the month. We don't have enough time. We don't have enough influence. We don't have enough whatever. And God is like, no, I have promised you that I will supply all of your need. And then spiritual victory. That we don't have to fear anything that can get in the middle of our relationship between us and God. Whatever struggle you are looking at today, that God promises you freedom from whatever that is, freedom that will allow you to experience victory. These are the 3 promises that God makes to us all over Scripture. But when God promises us, that means that we have to do our part. And the caveat is that we have to do our part. Many of you are worrying, and I worry about the people in our lives whose lives are not looking the way they should. And so we think that we have to do our part and help somebody struggling do their part. God's promises are for you, and you have to do your part. You can't do somebody else's part. And God's promises are true for them. And he's going to take care of whatever is happening in their lives. You just have to focus on what your part is. And so your part of claiming God's victory is remembering over worry is that God is with you and for you in every circumstance, real or imagined. That is your part of claiming God's victory over worry. That God is with you and for you in every circumstance, real or imagined. So doing our part requires that we first address fear. Again, if you follow me on social media, you know that I am terrified of spiders. But recently, I met the cutest little spider. And so, well, let me introduce him to you. Check this out.
Hi. I've been captured. I was playing hide and seek, and I ran up to him. I was like, Tiger. Then, there he is. He's looking at me. Hi. Now's my chance to escape.
Yeah, I said he was cute. He can't live in my house, though. Because you know that moment when, like, the spider gets away and then you go to slap it and then it, like, escapes and then you begin to think about all the what-if worries and is it sitting somewhere staring at you? And then you feel like you only have one choice. Like you got to grab a tissue and burn down your house. While I was writing the book in Bible study, it was actually my fear of spiders that God used to help me understand the relationship between fear and worry. I want you to think about whatever your fear is, the loss of a job, a health condition, a relational struggle. That is actually like the center of a spider's body. The what-if worries, those are all of the legs around it. I like to say that the fear of your fear is your worry. If you have the fear in the center, everything that you fear that arises from that core fear, that's what your worries are about. All of those what-ifs. In the book in the Bible study, I call this concept 8-legged worry. Imagine if you're afraid of losing your job. What are all of the what-ifs? What if I can't find another job? What if we have to sell our house? What if we don't have health insurance? What if I find a lesser paying job? What if we have to move? What if we can't do the things we hope to? You know how you have all of those what ifs. And for many of us, we've convinced ourselves that that kind of thinking is productive. But that kind of thinking isn't productive. Because what it ends up doing is it creates a spiral. And it creates this spiral that makes us worn out and stressed out because that center fear is the actual situation that's going on. But all of those what ifs, all of those are just way out there. The studies tell us that 85% of what we're worried about actually never happens. 85%. And maybe this is why the Bible literally has hundreds of verses about do not fear. Because when we address our fear, when we deal with our fear, that helps us from spiraling down into worry. And so God is telling us to deal with your fear in order to stop worry. Here's one of my favorite verses. That is one of those God's promises. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. Don't be discouraged, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will hold you up with my victorious right hand. That is a promise that God makes to us that addresses all of the fears that we have about anything we can face. Because we need to do that. Because if we do that, then Psalm 112 says, then they don't fear bad news. They confidently trust the Lord to take care of them. How many of you end up melting down when you think there's the littlest bit of bad news coming? Somebody says something and you don't even know if it's true, but you're like, oh, I can't believe it. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Oh, and you get all stressed out and you don't even know if it's real or not. For us, we've got to realize what God's promises are. And then we've got to realize that God is with us and for us. Because if we don't, then we're stuck in this whole tension of are we going to be a worrier and worry about all those what ifs, or are we going to be a warrior? And are we going to fight in faith so that we can stand strong against all of the things that are happening in our lives? Warriors, they live all in their mind. They try to do all of the work in their mind, and it just wears them out. You can see a warrior in a minute. They look tired. They look beat. They are stressed, and they have not been to the gym. But then we have the warrior. And the warrior is the person that knows that they are not doing it on their own. They know that the battle is won because God said, if I am for you, then who can be against you? And then that warrior knows that even though whatever they're facing is hard, they can hang in and hold on because they know that God will not fail or abandon them. It's interesting to me that Joshua was a valiant warrior, but there is something that leads me to believe that he had his own little worry problem. And I'm led to believe this because in 4 verses in the book of Joshua, in that first chapter, God repeats the same thing to Joshua 3 times. In Joshua chapter 1, verse 6, God begins with, be strong and courageous, for you are the one who will lead these people to possess all the land. Verse 7, God says, be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the instructions Moses gave to you. And then Joshua chapter 1, verse 9, a verse where many of us are familiar with. This is my command, Joshua, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord God is with you wherever you go. God repeats that phrase, be strong and courageous, 3 times in 4 verses. Could it be that as Joshua is standing on the edge of uncertainty and he is looking at the challenge behind him and the responsibility, the challenge in front of him and the responsibility behind him, that he was feeling a little bit overwhelmed, that he was feeling a little stressed out? Maybe he had a few what-if worries in his mind. He's the right man. Could he take it? Did he have enough courage? I know that I felt that way. Am I going to be okay? Do I have enough courage to deal with this? Can I hold on if it doesn't fix here soon? And God is telling us, I have promised you personal victory. I have promised to provide all of your needs. And most of all, I am going to be there for you no matter what. A warrior knows how to use the tools that God has given them. And for us, our worry battle, those tools are peace and courage and strength. And so right now, we're going to talk about what it looks like to practically use those tools. On your outline, number 1 is this. It's about the peace part. It's about the difference between worry and worship is who you are talking to. You never have peace when you are talking to yourself and giving all of those worried, negative mental movies. That is not a place where you find peace. Nobody has ever finished a horrible mental movie and went, whoa, I am so glad I thought that through. I feel much better now. I'm just going to lay right down and go to sleep. But when we look at worship, worship is, okay, God, there is something going on here. And I may not be able to, I don't have control over it. I don't even know how to handle it. I wish I wasn't here. But I am going to choose to trust in you. Jesus shows us he models it beautifully. Matthew chapter 26, Jesus is getting ready to go to the cross. He's in the Garden of Gethsemane. And at this point, he is just overwhelmed by what is before him. He is fully God, but yet he is still fully human. And so Jesus says this in verse 39. He says, my Father, if. Notice how Jesus didn't say, what if they come arrest me? What if they beat me? What if I end up suffering and it's painful? He says, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup of suffering be taken from me. Instead of God, if, he says, my Father, if. But what I find powerful, it's just a few verses later. Jesus is still struggling, and he comes back again, and he says, my Father, if this cup cannot be taken away. These 2 verses bring such encouragement to me because Margaret Thatcher said, sometimes you got to fight a battle more than once to win it. And Jesus shows us here, even though he said, my Father, if, God, if. But when he was struggling again, he didn't revert to one if. He came back and said again, my Father, if. And so for you and I, you may, if you've gotten into the habit of worrying, you're going to have to practice real hard to get out of the habit. But when you know the difference between worry and worship is who you're talking to, number 2, the second thing you do is you can fight in faith by flipping from what if to God if. You can change the direction of your thoughts by that simple action step. Instead of saying, what if I lose my job? God, if I lose my job? What if my child doesn't want to go to drug treatment? God, if my child won't go to drug treatment? God, if the test results are bad? Or what if the test results are bad? God, if the test results are bad? It changes the trajectory. And so instead of us keeping our eyes on what is before us, it allows us to fix our thoughts on who is for us. That we can flip from fear to faith by going from what if to God if. And then number 3 is that we can do it scared because we're not doing it alone. Every last one of us is facing something in life we don't want to go through. In fact, the last chapter of the book, I call even if. We go from what if worry to God if, and then I talk about the even if. For me, the even if was the chapter that I wrote while my dad was sick in those 8 days, because we are all facing an even if. And there are things that you and I are going to have to do in that time that are going to be hard, things that we don't want to face, things that we want to really, frankly, run away from. But when we know that God is with us and for us in every situation, real or imagined, we can cry out, God, if, and we can walk through the even if, even when it's hard. And then the fourth is the calm technique. This is actually one of the tools that I write about. There are so many different tools and techniques that I write about, and I'm going to teach this to you now. Because one of the things that happens with me is when I get stressed out and I get worried, all of those physical responses, it's hard for me to pray when my heart is racing and I want to cry or I am crying, when I'm feeling jittery and anxious. And so this calm technique is about how to reduce our body's physical response so that we can connect with God. So the instructions for the calm technique, you'll see them on the screen. They're in your outline so that you can take home. But we're going to begin first with the C. And the C stands for count to 10. Now, we're not going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, because when I do that, I'm still stressed. But we're going to do it a little bit differently. So in your seats, you can do this with me. You're going to inhale on the 1, and then you're going to exhale, Mississippi. So inhale 1, exhale, Mississippi. Inhale 2, exhale, Mississippi. Inhale 3, exhale, Mississippi. Inhale 4, exhale, Mississippi. You're going to go all the way to 10 and do it at that pace. And the reason why is that your body's physical response is going to fight you until you probably get to 5 or 6. So that's why you want to go all the way to 10. The A stands for acknowledge God's presence. Once you've reduced those physical symptoms, now you're able to actually invite God and go, God, I know you are here with me right now. It's hard. Acknowledge God's presence. The L is for list your fear. What is it in the center of your 8-legged worry? God, I'm afraid of losing my job. God, I'm afraid for my kids. God, I'm afraid for my marriage. God, I'm afraid for what's happening in our world today. List that fear. And then the M is meditate. Meditation is something that you already do if you're a worrier. We're just going to meditate on something that is more useful and productive. And when we are struggling with anxiety, we don't want meditation to get complicated. It's simply this: God is with me and for me. I am not alone. And you repeat that to yourself over and over again. When my dad was sick, I used the calm technique like my life literally depended on it. And so I'm going to encourage you to practice this for yourself. And parents, I want to encourage you to teach this to your kids. My freshman year of college, I came home at Christmas break, and I was all stressed out because I didn't have enough money for books that next semester. And I was worried. I didn't want to tell my parents I didn't have enough books because enough money, because if I told them, I was worried they want me to stay home that next semester and work instead of go back to school. And I really wanted to go back to school. So I was working my little part-time job, and I was all stressed up. Like, my Christmas break that year was horrible because I was all jittery and anxious. Well, it was the last day of Christmas break, and I was sitting on the couch in the living room, and my dad came downstairs, and he sat down next to me, and he said, hey, do you have enough money for books? Now, my dad, he was loving and kind and sweet teddy bear, but you did not lie to Bob Neal. And so I looked at him, and I did not say a word because I was not going to lie. Well, then my dad pulled his wallet out. He took out a $100 bill, and he laid it on the table. And he said, is that enough money for books? I looked at him, and I was like, is this a trick? Dad opened up his wallet again. He took out another $100 bill, and he laid it on the table. And he said, is that enough money for books? Now, at this point, my eyes have welled up with tears. I don't know what to do. And then my dad pulled out a third $100 bill. He laid it on the table, and he said, is that enough money for books? I had spent that entire Christmas break stressed out, freaked out, trying to cobble together all the pennies I could, and there lied everything that I needed right there in front of me. My father provided it. He said, Barbara, why didn't you tell us that you didn't have enough book money? I think that is a lesson that I remember when it comes to God. Because you and I are spending all of our time stressed out, freaked out, working 18 jobs, phone calls, all of the Mr. Fix-It and the busybodies and control freaks, trying to do the things when God has everything we need to win our worry battle. And so today is the last day that you need to live worn out by worry. If today is the day you are willing to ask God for his help. And so at all of our campuses, I want to invite you to pray with me as we close out this message. God, we are grateful and thankful that you are the God who provides us personal, provisional, and spiritual victory in life. God, we live in a world where bad people make bad decisions, bad things happen to good people, but yet, God, we can be secure in knowing that you are a good God and that we don't have to fear. Because just as you said to Joshua, you will not fail us, you will be with us, and you will never abandon us. And so today, God, we ask you for help with our worry battle. God, we ask for your help so that we no longer choose to wear ourselves out, but that we will learn how to fight in faith. And that we will remember always that you are with us and for us in every circumstance, real or imagined. We thank you, God, for that promise of victory today. In Jesus' name, amen.
Will you please